All right, let's talk about something that fundamentally challenges how we see everything, time itself. We all have this intuitive picture, right? That time is like a river, flowing steadily from a past we can't change towards a future that's yet to be written. But what if that whole picture is just plain wrong?
Well, believe it or not, back in 1949, the brilliant logician Kurt Gödel, who happened to be a very close friend and walking buddy of Albert Einstein, published a paper with that absolutely staggering conclusion. He actually used Einstein's own theories to argue that this flow of time we all feel, it might not be a real feature of the universe at all.
So, how on earth could a mathematical proof lead to such a wild idea? To really get your head around his argument, we need to rewind a little bit, back to the theory that first started showing cracks in our old-fashioned view of time, Einstein's special relativity.
Okay, so section 1 is all about relativity's problem with now. You see, the first hint that our gut feeling about time was off, it came decades before Gödel even got involved. And it's all because of this central problem in special relativity. What does now even mean?
Before Einstein, we all just kind of assumed there was one big universal clock for the entire cosmos. My now was your now was everyone's now. Simple. But special relativity completely blew that up. It showed that if you and I are moving at different speeds, we will literally disagree on what events are happening simultaneously. Your slice of the present moment is different from mine, and that means there's no single objective now for the whole universe.
In the language of physics, this means special relativity doesn't have a unique global time function. Think of all of space-time, past, present, and future, as a giant loaf of bread. How you're moving determines the angle you slice that loaf to get what you call a moment of now. But here's the kicker. Since no one's motion is more special than anyone else's, no single slice is the real one. And for Gödel, this was a massive red flag. If the passage of time is subjective, if it depends on your point of view, how can it possibly be a fundamental part of reality?
So Gödel got to thinking, maybe Einstein's more advanced theory of gravity, general relativity, would fix this mess and give us back a universal time. But what he found was, wow, it made the problem 1,000 times weirder.
He discovered a mathematical model of a universe that is perfectly consistent with every single law of general relativity. But it has this one very, very strange property. The entire universe is rotating. And to be clear, I don't just mean planets and galaxies are spinning inside of space. No, this is the very fabric of space-time itself, being twisted and dragged along by the rotation of everything in it.
This cosmic spinning has an absolutely bizarre consequence. You see, in physics, an object's possible future paths are defined by what's called a light cone. In Gödel's universe, this universal rotation is so extreme that it literally tilts these light cones over, causing them to loop back on themselves. This creates what physicists call closed time-like curves, or CTCs. And what are those? They are literal physical pathways that would allow you to travel into your own past.
Okay, so let's get into what that really means. The existence of these CTCs doesn't just make time travel possible, it completely shatters any meaningful distinction between past, present, and future. It just opens a Pandora's box of causal chaos.
Now, it's really important to get this straight. This is not cyclical time, like you see in some sci-fi where the universe lives out its whole history and then just starts over from the Big Bang. No, this is circular time. A CTC means that your personal path through space-time can form a closed loop. You could literally travel along this path and end up at an earlier point in your own life, shaking hands with a younger version of yourself, all without the universe needing to hit some cosmic reset button.
And that, of course, immediately brings up the age-old question, right? The grandfather paradox. If you can go back in time, what's to stop you from preventing your grandparents from ever meeting? Because if you did that, you would never have been born to go back in the first place, which is a flat-out logical contradiction.
Well, physics has a proposed, and honestly, a pretty neat solution. It's called the Novikov self-consistency principle, and it basically says that the laws of physics simply forbid paradoxes from happening. You can travel to the past, but you can't change it. Why? Because your actions were always part of one single consistent history. You can't kill your grandfather because, well, you didn't. History shows that you didn't, so something would always get in the way.
But this idea of self-consistency leads to an even stranger puzzle, the bootstrap paradox. This is where information can get trapped in a time loop, basically creating itself out of nothing. So, follow this. Imagine a physicist is so inspired by Einstein that he builds a time machine to meet him. He goes back to the past, only to discover that Einstein never existed. So to preserve history, our physicist takes out his notebook full of Einstein's theories and publishes them himself, becoming the Einstein he'd read about. So the question is, where did the theory of relativity come from? Not from our physicist and not from the original Einstein. It has no origin. It's just there.
So you're probably thinking, okay, this rotating universe is a cool thought experiment, but our universe doesn't seem to be rotating. And you're right, it doesn't. But that detail is the absolute key to Gödel's final, and I mean devastating, argument about the nature of time itself.
See, Gödel's argument is really a philosophical one, but it's built on physics. He argued that if general relativity is our true theory of gravity, its laws must work for all possible universes, not just the one we live in. And since his rotating universe is a perfectly valid solution, it represents a universe that could exist under those laws. And in that possible universe, because of time travel, there's no coherent way to separate past from future. The whole idea of time flowing from one moment to the next completely breaks down.
And that leads to his final conclusion. If the flow of time is something that can be totally absent in a physically possible universe, then it cannot be a fundamental property of reality itself. It has to be an illusion, something that emerges from our limited, human way of perceiving the world, not from the deep physics of the cosmos. Now, it's super important to separate Gödel's big metaphysical point from the practical effects of relativity that we use every single day. For instance, the satellites that make your GPS work have to constantly correct their clocks because time literally ticks at a different rate for them up in orbit. But these are engineering problems we solve within a timeline we assume is real and flowing forward. Gödel's argument is questioning whether that timeline itself is fundamentally real in the first place.
And this leaves us with a truly profound final thought to chew on. If Gödel is right, if the past, the present, and the future all exist simultaneously in some static, four-dimensional reality, then our journey through life might not be about creating an unknown future. It might just be about uncovering a pre-existing one. The story's already written, we're just turning the pages.